Welcome to Climate Courage. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's David Coe.
And at the far end, as usual, you have me, Richard Busolato. Welcome.
Welcome. And so we've got Singapore, England, and France represented today. Is that right?
That's correct.
So is it 9 o'clock in the morning for you, Richard?
Yes. It's an hour sleep in compared to normally. So always welcome with open arms.
It's better than the 7 a.m.
Yeah.
No, I always feel sorry for you when the sun's still rising.
Absolutely fine. It's a good way to kick off your Friday morning.
Yeah, but I have noticed that a lot of the climate activists that I try and recruit onto the show that are in the UK don't really want to do the 7 a.m. time slot. 9 o'clock in the morning for you, so must be the bankers in you that get you here.
Much easier to get the finance people coming in at that time.
Exactly.
Much easier.
Yeah. Versus the hippies. All right, so today we're going to cover a lot of stuff. Obviously, we're going to talk about the news, but what we wanted to do is, so this week I published, last week I published a piece, which was inspired by a lot of conversations I'm having, and I know that David and Richard are having. And no matter what I do or how much, sorry, my phone's just talking to me. No matter what I do, no matter how much I share, and for years and years and years, I've been sharing tips and ideas and what you can do and how you can do it, and every single conversation starts the same. What can I do? And then there's a powerlessness in that. It just that sense of, well, I'm just one person. How can I make any difference? And we need to get beyond the powerlessness. And we obviously need 1 billion people acting. So it's a big number, but like we've discussed, we get 1.4 billion Catholics changing. That's a pretty good start, right? So, perhaps it's the religious institutions that'll lead the way. Yeah.
Yes.
And the Pope's looking good on that front. So I published this 54-page PDF on LinkedIn, and I put it in a blog as well. So I'm just going to share it here. So the first thing is, that sense of, let me get rid of the banners. If you're listening on the podcast, you're not going to see the visuals, but it won't matter. All right. So we've got some voices in the background somewhere.
Probably my neighbors.
Okay. All right. Maybe just mute if there's a bit noisy.
Yeah,
all right. So
I'll do that.
The message is I can't deal with it. Can't deal with all the bad news. Can't deal with anything. Completely overwhelmed. It's all too much. And it's a very disempowering place for people to be. So David and Richard, are you hearing this as well?
I think it's gone somewhat sort of like what you do as a result of that is you blank out. So there's a lot of that.
Yeah, that's true. So
definitely there's an element of that people sense I'm not gonna deal with it because it overwhelms me. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's makes the powerlessness feel even worse, right?
Yeah.
So the first message is, everyone, we've just got to breathe. We've got to, this is not an easy time. All of us know it. We're listening to the world news, the crazy stuff that's happening. No question about it. So, we've got to get ready for this, and so what we've always known and what we've always enjoyed and felt comfortable with, that's not the future that we've got. But if we sit in a constant state of fear, that's not going to help us either, because we know in our own lives, you can never make a good decision when you're sitting in a place of fear. So getting ready for it, getting our minds ready for it. Just either of you just jump in if you want. I haven't formalized this as a presentation or anything. I just figured it would be worth talking to. One thing I'd say is I've got a lot of friends who are really having mental health challenges and are medicating for themselves for it. And they're the ones who say, I can't do this. And that needs to be considered, and we need to be the strength for them. I say we need to be the guides through this time. So I think that's something that we all need to be very aware of. Have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I think it's a really interesting sort of time, and this is part of what I've started talking a lot more, is that you can't think of this as something that you somehow have to be able to fix entirely yourself, but that you need to have that faith in carrying on. It's like the conversation we had the previous time with Lady Heather. How do you carry on in the face of kind of adversity that you don't know how to deal with in a way. So to become the guide is also to have that faith that actually you can be that.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of very important to try and underlie this, is when you stand there on that beautiful green field with that horrendous storm ahead, and you're sort of looking at it, you don't need to think you have to somehow draw that faith from you personally, but that you can have faith in being able to do it.
Yeah, I like that. So yeah, faith, I think that's going to become a word that we use more and more. So we're in the poly crisis, and there's a lot going on. I've got on the slide, if you feel overwhelmed by climate change, the biodiversity crisis, the impact of chemicals and microplastics in our environment, which we know are going to take thousands of years to break down. War, we're seeing the terrible, terrible situation that's unfolding in Gaza, the babies starving, genocide, politics, and just everything that's going across our screens. I've been reading a lot of the stuff about, flooding the zone, the whole Trump admin, sort of their philosophy, and it works, but we're all in it together. We're not alone. So the key point that I always say to everyone, and I'd love to know if you guys agree with this, is you don't have to understand everything that's going on. You really don't. In fact, in some ways, I encourage people to skip the knowledge part, because if you go into the depth of this knowledge, you sink into it for a good couple of years. One, just trying to work it out, but two, the emotions of dealing with what you find. So if you don't want to face it, but you want to do something about it, trust those people like us who have spent the time and the effort and the hours and the days and the months and the years. Like I've basically been doing this for 9 years, just this, to try and understand it so that I can work out what we need to do next. And if you don't trust me, there'll be someone in your life that you trust. So while I think knowledge is incredibly important, I don't think we've got time to deal with a world fully in despair either. That's my biggest concern.
There's a really interesting comment made in a YouTube clip thing I saw yesterday, and there was a comment made, and the comment was that I'm not going to go into other science things. This is from a science guy, right?
Yeah.
And he was saying, because basically people use it to trap you into endless discussions.
Yeah.
The important thing is just appreciating, what is important to you in that way. And this is the part that, as you do that, you're going to make it relevant to yourself. And that's the important part of it. Because if you just delve into kind of the details of how radiative forcing works, or how, microplastics actually last that long, or whatever it is, and so on, you're trying to do the job of thousands of scientists in that way. And what you lack is understanding. So Richard and I, we started talking in terms of sort of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. So knowledge is facts. It's the knowing of facts. And some facts are important. It's not that they're all not important, but understanding is key. Understanding, as you have to, this part is the part that makes the knowledge useful. It's the understanding of who you are, your world, people around you, and all the rest. And wisdom is the part that tells you what your own path needs to be. So you can have understanding of everything, and then if you just do that, you'll be chasing everything along. But at the end of the day, this tree that you have there is that is your tree. That you are a tree growing. You grow new leaves every year. As Richard and I have been talking about, we're old trees growing new leaves, because we have to do that. So that's what we do. So bringing all that together into the context of who you are yourself, that's the wisdom part. That's the part that brings out the genius that is in you. That's the part that allows you to have faith that you can go forward. And the huge amount of information that's flowing around, that knowledge, that's part of the trap. And this guy was really interesting in saying that's all part of the climate denial, is to get stuck into those details.
Right. Interesting. I haven't heard that perspective before. You'll have to share that with me. Yeah, I think because it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But then you might be like us and you be driven to understand the bigger story. But you know,
you do need it, but as you say, there are people doing it, and the point is, when you look out and use your own experience, you start realizing, it's very much part of our nature to want to open the door and actually get out there and face the world, rather than hoping that it's all going to disappear. All the problems are going to disappear. We know problems never disappear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So, and then the idea is everyone just jumps straight into action, and we mean everyone. I always say we need 1 billion people imperfectly changing. There's no perfect way of doing this, because what our goal is to get out of overshoot. And overshoot basically means we're taking more than the planet can regenerate in a given year. And a lot of us come from nations where we're already in overshoot before the end of the first quarter. So March, we're already in overshoot. So that means we're taking so much from Earth that's debt that has to be repaid by our children in the future. The more we take, so that's what we need. We just all need to say, right, it's time. So we have to think big, and a lot of people talk about the 1%, but it's not really the 1%. It's the 0.001%, and these are the multimillionaires and the billionaires. And then we've got the 1%, and the vast majority of people that we know are in the 1%, as well as the 10%. So I think it was $38,000 a year is an income for the 10%. And that's also the vast majority of people we know. I appreciate that in a lot of countries, a $38,000 salary is not a big salary. It's not a fancy life in a lot of places. In a country like India, a $38,000 US salary could go a lot further than, say, in a country like Australia. But the bigger point is we've got to reduce our material and energy consumption, especially if we're in those countries that are in overshoot within the first quarter, by about 70%. So that's why I've got give or take, because different countries have got different amounts of consumption and different levels of overshoot.
I think the way I come to think a little bit about that is the cycle of the materials and things that we use. And if we think back to nature in that way, think back to the tree, growing new leaves, and what does it do? It grabs a bunch of kind of sunlight, carbon, and other things in the air and stuff, and then it grows it out and dumps it after a year. But those leaves recycle. Those leaves become useful again very, very quickly. So hedgehogs burrow under them to try and hide away from the winter, and other things like that happen. I remember looking through a pile that we had in the garden with my kids that had been kind of semi-composting away, and found all these snakes in there and the rest. And so this cycle of how you use something and how long you need it is all related to how often it becomes useful again in that way. So if you get a plastic bottle, and I had this experience, I had a plastic bottle. We were driving back from Germany, picking up my father-in-law, who passed away a few years ago, has his last stuff with my wife from them, bringing back. So it was kind of an emotional journey, and we were driving back along, and I had this bottle of water that's from them. And then the next few days I was using the bottle. And then I started thinking, okay, I can cut this, I can plant it in it. I can start doing other things with it. So I'm extending that usefulness of what it is in that way. Yeah. Now, what we tend to think is that we can somehow pass it off to someone else and somehow it gets recycled and all the rest of it, as opposed to simply continuing its useful existence. So think about the leaf that falls on the ground continues its useful existence as it goes along through. And when we start thinking of that, we extend the length of kind of we reduce the material use that we actually are doing, because we're continuing with it. And my mom used to do this a lot when I was growing up in Hong Kong, and all the people used to do that in all the places. There was just nothing was kind of thrown away. There was always something else you used it for in that sense. So behind all of this thinking big is the really kind of, in some ways, how do you actually engage yourself as nature engages itself in that way? How do you think about all the materials that you have? And you need some material like my laptop, which actually goes on. It's going to take a long time, for it to become used again. And you can talk about all the recycling things and so on, but sometimes, often those are also hiding the fact that you just want to get a new one.
Yeah.
So how do you go past and say, I can still use this?
It's just that mindset, right? It's just, everything that you bring into your home, you bring in consciously and think about, and everything that leaves your home, you do the same. Our rubbish bin is a tiny, small bag because in Singapore, they empty the bins every day, and it's a small bag. The vast majority of our neighbors, their rubbish bins are full and overflowing, and so that's just a mindset, so we consciously have been thinking about that for a long time. And what can we reuse? A pump bottle for something can be used for something else. You can't use them all if you keep buying more and more. But that real consciousness is what we need to start seeing. People need to start seeing their waste.
And it's like a hermit crab, right? It uses a discarded shell for a home, and you so things can get used in ways that were never the original intent, as nature does all the time. And we tend to think of it as saying, okay, that needs to be recycled back into whatever it was. But the recycling itself, we forget recycling itself is hugely demanding of nature and its resources in order to. So it's much better in the way of thinking, okay, how can I actually innovate and create something else out of it? That would work.
Although, I mean, there's just too much, right? So we need the big producers of these items to completely rethink how they do it. I always say sustainability is a poverty problem. If you look at a plastic bottle of Coke, a litre bottle of Coke, next to 6 cans of Coke, all those 6 cans can be recycled, and that plastic bottle lasts for 500 years in the environment. The 6 cans of Coke are worth twice as much as the plastic bottle of Coke, right? So we can't be perfect, and we can't beat ourselves up. We've got to do the best we can wherever we are. We don't all have access to farmers markets. We don't all have access to, the places where we can go and buy things in bulk. We just don't. So it's just about doing the best we can. I'm going to say, Richard, when you unmute, I'll know you're ready to talk. All right.
Absolutely, I'm here.
All right. But like I said, the 125 richest people on Earth, each individually emit 3 million tons of CO2 a year. So it's obviously out of proportion, but it's also things like where they invest their money contributes to their emissions. So there's no question that this is the group that has to shrink the most, but we need to remember that if we shrink our impact, we also impact their bottom line. So, we can have an impact on them in other ways for whatever reason. And we're going to talk about this probably at the end. They don't seem to be inclined. They're still building their super yachts and buying their private jets. So, but we still have to do it because, sorry, David.
I was going to say, I'm always wary of kind of partitioning. This sort of partitioning thing. It sets up a perfect sort of kind of. I've forgotten what that statement is. Kind of like it's the other kind of thing situation. Yeah. And so you end up thinking it's the other. And I'd like to throw something out there, and again related to sort of the richer people in the world, 38,000, the richer people in the world, which are basically all the people living in the developed countries, plus a huge growing number in China. Not everybody there, and not everybody in India, but there are a lot of very rich people in India,
Thailand,
in Thailand, and
Singapore.
So on. and they have a lifestyle where I've noticed it a lot more in a way. They go and make 2-3 trips a year or 4 trips a year around the world, go and see this and that, especially when they retire. And it's like, the kids are in the States and other places, and they go and travel there, and they see the grandkids, and they travel to somewhere else to do that. And they generally have a very nice life. Sorry to say this, mate, but the planet can't afford you having that sort of life.
Yeah.
So,
but it's unfair because we've had that life opportunity for longer, based on where we were born and where we're, and so it sort of makes it a little bit unfair. But at the same time, if everyone lived the life I'd lived, and I'm doing my penance now for that life. But if everyone lived the life I lived, I mean, we'd even be in more overshoot, right? So,
Yes.
but as soon as I became aware, I just started going, well, okay, I need to start first.
And fairness is really a terrible way to kind of try to find out who you are and how you should live.
Mm.
There are two problems with it. The first problem is that it makes you always compare yourself to something else. So you're never actually finding out who you are and what is right for you in that way. So that makes you highly susceptible to the advertising that's going on. Again, the topic that we talked about before. Because the whole advertising thing is to move our emotions into thinking that somehow, we too can have that, or we too should deserve that, but never asking who are you really and what do you really want or need.
Yeah.
So that's one side of that. And the other part of the fairness is, of course, when resources are constrained, which is the point of what we're talking about. The atmosphere is being constrained by too much rubbish being dumped into the atmosphere. Just think about that. You see the picture of the oceans being flooded or the Atacama Desert with all the piles of rubbish there, but you don't see the picture of the atmosphere actually being filled up with all the rubbish, which is what climate change is really driven by in that way. When resources are being constrained, how do you distribute it? You can't. In a way, you're not going to be able to distribute on the principle of some sort of fairness, because there is no way of weighing fairness without it ultimately reflecting on the fact that we are always in some way, one way or another, selfish in that sense. So be very careful.
No, I suppose what I'm sort of saying is, for someone like me to stand here and go, we've all got to do this, could come across almost colonial, right? I've had the privilege of my life, but you can't have the same privilege. That is how the message could land, but it's not that at all. It's yes, I had the benefit of, like I said, being born when and where I was, and I lived an amazing life and had a great opportunity with that life, but have come to realize that I can't live that life and the way I was living. But and like I've got on this slide, most people miss this point. So when they blame the multimillionaires and the billionaires, there's 3.8 billion middle-class people, and it's expected to grow to 4.8 billion by 2030. I don't think we can get to 4.8 billion by 2030 based on just what we're seeing in the environment. But it's this sheer scale. And I've, living out in Asia, I've seen this change really, really clearly. Going from what David was talking about, the generation that basically saved everything, that there was no waste, to this incredible amount of waste and consumption sort of existing in societies across this region. So I've seen, because the biggest growth has come from Asia. But, so when we blame the billionaires, they're not dumping the clothes in the Atacama Desert. Well, they might be. They might be profiting off the sale of those clothes, but it's us buying them in such extraordinary numbers that is creating the actual problem in the environment. So we're all in it together. And like you said, David, when I hear it's China's fault, it's America's fault, it's their fault, it's the fossil fuel industry's fault, it's all of our fault. All of our fault. Every industry, every country, we're all in this together. And I think that's a really important message. We've got to stop blaming and pointing, and we've just got to start coming together and acting, because we really are at a critical phase, which is obvious to anyone who's paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to have a choice, basically. So it's just going to be coming at you. So all we are saying, Andrea, who's been doing this for a lot longer, Richard, myself, all we're saying is, look, it's coming at you. Just you can keep your head in the sand, you can go along and close your eyes, or you can get stuck in the details and everything else. Whichever way you want to react with it, as you like, it's still going to come at you. That, in a sense, is the ultimate unfairness, But why me, right? Well, it's just the way it's going to be. So your choice, your genuine choice, is how do you actually get out there so that you can be a part of something where people appreciate you being around, because you're going to need a living. And to have a living, you're going to need people to appreciate you being around. And if you go around spending all the stuff and wasting all the things that other people look at, then they're going to look at you badly.
And
you
coming
that way too. And that's how the interaction comes. But if you actually change and actually become more yourself, when you become more yourself, you use less, because you're not chasing everything else.
Yeah. All right. So how do we do that? So, I came up with a whole bunch of ideas, and there's so many more I could have added to this. And I want to say to people, like, I know plenty of people who are doing a lot of these things, are planning a lot of these things. I am not judging anyone for anything. I really appreciate why people are doing what they're doing. So I appreciate that people don't even think about it. So there is no judgment. Anytime I share these things, I want to be really clear on that. All I'm saying is to maybe just start with one, because what you find is when you start with one, it starts you on the journey, and then you find the next one and the next one and the next one. It's really where the transformation begins. But don't kick yourself. Don't feel guilty. We've all done this. I'm like I said, I'm as guilty as anyone. But the first thing I always say is we've got to start avoiding single-use anything. And obviously single-use plastics are number one on the list. I've cleaned a lot of beaches in my time, and I see what this looks like. But anything that's created requires energy and material to be created. And, I've been in shopping centers, everyone's walking around with paper bags. It's not made from recycled paper. It's made from trees. And when plastic bags were first designed, which they were actually designed not as single use, they were designed as multi-use. They were designed because the person who designed them was very concerned about deforestation because of the paper bags that we were using at the time. There's probably at that time there were maybe 100 million middle class people because it was in the 50s. Now we've got 3.8 billion people. So all of us walking around with paper bags, ordering so much takeout, even if it's in a sustainable container. Like the amount of paper and cardboard that is being used probably concerns me more than anything, even more than the amount of plastic that's being used. And that's saying something, especially for Asia. So
I'm with you completely with that. And what I would say is, sometimes it's really hard to avoid because, the world we live in has everything packaged. If you're in Asia, everything is really packaged, right? If you're in Japan, your sweets are packaged 3 times before you can get to the stuff. Right?
Yeah.
So what I think of is if you can't avoid it, then think of using it twice and then double that. So then you end up using it 4 times and then you end up using it 8 times and so on. So that's kind of challenges your imagination. I've got a crisp wrapper or sweet wrapper. How do I use it again? So I've got these contact lenses, daily contact lenses, and they're on these casings. And I'm like, how do I use it again? Right. And we can share ideas about what we can do. And I was going to fill bottoms of plant pots with it in that way.
To drain.
So to drain. So to help soil drain bits and stuff. And then that becomes like, oh, that's one way of doing it. I was and there are, I'm sure there are other ideas everybody will have that can come along and think about what you can do with it without needing to do anything more with them than what they are. So we tend to think if we have to reuse something, we somehow have to transform them and forget that transforming it takes even more resources along the way.
Yeah.
Whether that's energy to heat it up to do something or whatever it is. So what can you actually just use as it is, which is what nature does. Tree falls down, the wood slowly is reused by all sorts of things, as it is in its different phases as it goes on through. So think about that. That's the single-use items. Avoid if you can, but very often we can't because, like my contact lenses, the shell casing comes in that way. They are designed to be single-use, and there's very little. But I can actually challenge myself to imagine how can I use it again. Richard, you've been really silent.
I have indeed, but I think what we're describing here actually boils down to The simple principle of reduce, reuse, recycle, and the sort of tapering off in the utility of those measures. Ultimately, and this is very aligned with, you know, some core philosophies, that the nature and the planet has a capacity for a pace, and we are constantly trying to outjump it by consuming more than what the nature and the planet can provide. So first of all, we need to align that consumption pattern to the actual capacity of our environment. That's reduce our consumption to that level.
I think of it not as can provide, but can cope with after we dump it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And at the moment, what we are actually doing very, very actively is we're diminishing that planet's capacity for it to cope with us, because we're impairing it in all sorts of ways. And it's infinitely more useful once we have made the purchase and we have extracted those resources to actually reuse it in a multitude of ways before we resort to the final stage, which is trying to recycle it. Because reusing it is much, much more effective than recycling.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. And so, you know, this is a picture of my bees, well, my boys on the beach with one of their mates, James. And, you know, like, I think in Asia, we saw the tide of waste much, much more than the rest of the world. But that tide has, I know, you know, we're seeing it in Central America and across Africa as well. But I think that tide is much more obviously hitting the shores of all nations now. You look across the top of Australia, where there's not that many people, but it's just trashed, you know. So it's, I mean, it's going all the way out to Antarctica, you know. So it's just out of control, and we've got to see it, and we've got to stop contributing to it. And like I said, it's not easy, but we've just got to start trying, and we've got to start forcing these businesses that we buy from to do it. You know, like the Coca-Cola recommendation. Charge double for a plastic bottle, and charge half the price for the cans. You know, start making different choices like that. So we know it can be done when there's will. We've seen a lot of the beer companies, they change the plastic sort of rings to turtle friendly rings. So, you know, there's lots that can be done, and we're not doing it. You know, every time I go into a supermarket, I feel really disappointed that more radical transformation hasn't happened. I always say fast is in the title. Is it time to avoid it? So obviously fast food, fast fashion, fast furniture, fast decorations, which is something I came up with. And this is when you see at Christmas time, everyone sort of putting up their tree and their theme for the year. So when we grew up, it was the same decorations year after year after year. And then somehow we got into a culture where we had new decorations every year. They were much, much cheaper. They basically wouldn't even last the year. And then you just chuck them out in the waste, right? So we can change that mindset. But fast food, I've got family members who are addicted to it. It's not just bad for us, it's full of chemicals, but it's also massively responsible for the deforestation that's going on. Fast fashion, you know, this is something I really struggle with. I'm seeing there's still so many of the influencers out there with their hauls. One good thing about the Trump tariffs is they can't really get the hauls without paying all the extra cost. But, you know, when you're wearing synthetic clothing, which means it's made from fossil fuels, especially for females, you're absorbing it into your body. So, you know, the active wear that a lot of girls are loving, you know, it's near your pits. So you're absorbing it in through your sweat glands, and that's dangerous. And obviously underwear, you know, in good old days, it used to be silk. Now it's all polyester type fabrics, and you're wearing that on the most intimate part of your bodies, which means you're absorbing these chemicals and these plastics into your body. So it's not good for any of us. So fast furniture, that's one of the things that drives me absolutely nuts. You know, it used to last for generations. So, you know, and I think IKEA is responsible for that, you know, and then the Chinese sort of supercharged fast furniture, but deforestation, plastics, waste, the idea that, you know, you upgrade your home every couple of years, you know, I don't know how we ever got there. I really don't.
Well, I mean, you know, money has to do with it, but I'd like to throw one fast in there. That's not what people normally think of, but it's really, really important. And that's fast sustainability. This idea that we can get there quickly, we need to do that. Sustainability is a mindset. You're trying to change generations. You want that mindset to develop. So if you think about the mindset that has developed, that has ended up culminating in fast food, fast furniture, and fast clothing, and all of those things, to switch that around is a very gradual process that you need to be aware of. So if you try to do it quickly, what happens is that you're replacing one item with another and then saying it's good. So it's the plastic bag replaced with the paper bag. And so you can now use as much as you can, and you don't really care about it in that way. Change the mindset back of saying a bag lasts for a long time, and then after it has crumbled up, it has a use. As a crumpled up bag with holes in it, that has a use. I just have to discover what it is, and so on. In that way, takes a very long time. So sustainability is a mindset. It is spiritual. It is about having that faith in being able to go forward with it, and actually not forcing the pace, except for the pace that nature will naturally take it. And it's going to take 10,000 years to get rid of some of these plastics. That's the pace we have to accept, so that we don't chuck more in there. As opposed to thinking, I've now got a solution. I've now fixed it. So I want to throw that in there, because increasingly, what people do not appreciate is that at the end of the day, the businesses that function, the people who live off the profits of the business are the people who are retired, because the rest of us who work get paid from the revenues of the business, one way or another, whether we work through the taxes that the business pays or the government pays us to do our job, or whether we work directly for a business so they pays, or we have a business where we eat off the income from it in that way. But the ones who eat off the profits of this thing are the growing masses of people who are retiring, who have that lovely middle class background and have that lovely middle class expectations. And they're always driving it along, and they're going to drive the politics because there's a lot more of them in the rich countries, and there are going to be a lot more of them as well. So this is a real gradual mentality change that we're actually facing. It's a poly crisis, but it's actually met by nature, how it comes back. Think of one of the mass extinctions, the asteroid that came and blew open the dinosaurs and sort of said goodbye to them. Nature gradually comes back. We have to allow that time and that pace, and accept that we're not going to solve it, but we can actually establish a whole new mindset to how we become part of nature again.
Is it a new mindset or an old mindset?
It's an ancient mindset. Absolutely. This is where,
absolutely,
clothes are becoming trendy again, kind of thing.
Yeah, and absolutely. You look back in time where resources weren't plentiful because we didn't have the means back then to extract them in full. A lot of those practices are becoming very fashionable again for a very simple reason. They're sound practices. These are good practices, whether it's got to do with farming or fishing or, beer brewing. You are actually going back to discovering that maybe we weren't so retarded after all a couple of 100 years ago, when we actually understood this better than we thought, because they are fundamentally sound practices, and they're not shortcuts to achieving short-term outcomes at the expense of the long-term viability of our planet.
Yeah, and we're going to get onto the economics later, because we always obviously do. But the fast fashion industry is obviously one, but it's not just fast fashion; it's luxury fashion, which is I don't know if you've seen the videos of the Chinese factories talking about how they're making the Hermes and Louis Vuitton bags, but there are enough clothes on this planet right now to clothe the next 6 generations, like just that. Right. So what can we do about it? So obviously trying to buy natural fibers, but if you're buying lots of clothes in natural fibers, you're not contributing. You're still taking. So it's about really, really reducing. So the recommendation is 3 to 5 new items of clothing a year. And obviously we need to take underpants out of that, but we can swap, we can share. There's so many things that we can do, but if you just buy high quality products, buy less, And also we need to change the whole culture around fashion of you can only be seen in something once. And we're seeing some celebrities starting to sort of talk about this and represent this, but it's not enough. The message is still very much, look at me, and I'm fabulous. I've always got something new on. So, that's something that we can all make a very, very clear decision about. I do things like I dye my clothes, so when they start to get too faded, they're not worn out. Repairing clothes, fixing, those small nicks, just trying to make things last as long as they can. And then at the end of the life, and I try to buy natural fibers rather than synthetic. In Thailand, I was able to donate to a lot of charities, the whole family's clothes. I can't do it so much here. We use old clothes for cleaning. And also I find those sort of communities where they take the fabrics and sew them into other things. In Asia, you can stuff pillowcases with old clothes, and that can become a pillow for someone who doesn't have a pillow. So there's lots of different things that we need to start thinking about and doing. But the fashion industries, it's a big issue, and we're seeing lots of people talking about it, but it's not changing. And I think the consumer demand is a big part of that.
Of course it is. I mean, it's what's driving them. I mean, these businesses have not been created out of thin air. As long as you have consumers thinking it's a great idea to wear new clothes every day, or every party I go to, I can't wear the same shirt or whatever. That kind of business will always be in demand. It might alter its shape or its geographical location, wherever it's cheaper to manufacture it. And I strongly suspect China will soon be too expensive. Those businesses will always flourish. But that comes back to the mindset that, clothing gets worn down eventually and you need to replace it. But there are some, quite simple tricks to do in this sense. If you buy a suit, and I probably bought my last suit because I have quite a few hanging on a peg and they're not used very much. But for the younger generation who will soon be wearing suit and tie in the office, I have no doubt, always buy a suit with 2 trousers, because the trousers will wear out so much before your jacket. And then you have a jacket you can't really use because your trousers have been worn out. And, when you're young, you make that mistake. When you're 30, you don't. You always buy a suit with 2 trousers, and then you get a lot more use out of it. And
but can I ask you, can I ask you, were you both surprised by the fact that we've got enough clothes on the planet to address the next 6 generations? Was that a surprise to you?
Yeah.
No,
of course it is. I knew it was a lot. To me, it's shocking, but I shouldn't be shocked anymore by these stats.
No, I mean, I'm not shocked by it. I mean, I think that I think the reality is that we don't have clothes that can last the next 6 generations. I think that's really the issue along with it. People used to have, say, wedding dresses used to be passed on, right? Kind of like your mom's wedding dresses. The suit was kind of from your father or whatever it might be in that way. Yeah. So clothing that lasts multiple generations, because I still remember, and in fact my mum, is still sort of giving away bits of clothing in that way. But we ourselves turn away from it. So there's a wardrobe full. My dad passed away a few years ago, and there's a wardrobe full of clothing that are his. I've gradually come to actually think, what, I can use those. It's actually a hard thing for people to think about doing, because the style is different. The way it is, it looks like, I don't want to look like my dad, for a start. That's always a problem. But the thing is the fact that what I think of is that the items don't last for 6 generations. That's part of the issue there. And the other thing is we don't actually have this situation. When I was growing up, there was always this sort of situation of what do I wear? I don't want to look the same as someone else. Find ourselves wearing the same thing, because there are fewer shops, fewer opportunities, and fewer styles and stuff. And so what you end up with is that there was a very high chance that you're always going to wear the same clothing as someone else. So there's a lot more in sort of coordinating with your friends when you go somewhere, and there's a lot more in terms of kind of thinking yourself about how you modify your clothing and do stuff of that kind. But today, everything is in small blocks, right? So a shop stocks fewer items so that you can have stock more different styles, and that's how you end up with more pieces that you have lying around. And we go to more events, we do more things, and so we end up having to think we need to buy something new each time. Got a wedding to go to, I've got to buy something new. Do you really?
Yeah. I used to shop at secondhand clothes shops when I was a teenager because my parents never had any money, and I couldn't afford all the fancy clothes my friends afforded. So I was always very unique. I was also a really good sewer. So I used to get like these 70s dresses and sort of adapt them, and so I was sustainable before my time, but out of financial necessity. But it's that sort of thing. Like I'm going to buy a sewing machine and relearn how to use it because I used to love it, just so I can repair stuff rather than throwing them away. So yeah, more of that. My friend Jen will be proud of that. I'm just looking at the time, so I want us to see if we can move faster. So obviously reducing meat is really important. So I say by 70%. Better if we eat none at all. Becoming vegetarian, but obviously vegan is your best option. We've seen it in the 2 sets of floods in Australia where the cows and the livestock have been impacted by the floods. If you combine extensive flooding with the extensive heat event, and a fire event, all of which are capable in Australia, not only is meat going to become so extraordinarily expensive at some point that you might not even be able to access meat, which is where I'm saying, it should be obvious that eventually we are all going to have to be vegan, whether we like it or not. So it's just a good time to practice. A friend of mine, Rebecca, for her 50th, I organised a vegan feast. And I spent weeks doing research on vegan food. So just get into veganism, even just a little bit, learn about it, what it is, what are some of the recipes that you can enjoy. And if you've got kids, it's a good thing to involve them in. White goods. So I remember in Australia there was a story of a guy who got fined because he basically pushed his fridge off a cliff at the side of a road because it was so expensive to take it to the tip, or the rubbish tip, or whatever they're called in other parts of the world. And I thought it was a really interesting one. So I think we should be putting our white goods outside of the gates of the brands that manufacture them. And if they don't have a system set up where they take them back, because there's so many pieces in these fridges that can be recycled. So the floods, I was watching a video in Taree, which is a town in Australia that just got swamped with floods, and outside all of the shops is everything that's being thrown away, and they're just waiting for skips. But so much of that, won't be recycled. It'll just be dumped into the environment. So let's return our goods to the manufacturers, and also think about what you can share. So, water jets, because in the tropics you get a lot of mold. So we don't all need to buy a water jet because you only use it a couple of times a year. Can we have a street where we all come together and we buy one and we share it? We don't need to buy everything. We don't need our fridges and our sheds full of stuff that we only use once or twice a year. So I think the sharing economy idea is a really important one. Any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that will happen by necessity, right? As the cost of living pressures ramps up on people, you will find different ways of using our resources better. And actually, call me a nasty capitalist, but the price mechanism will enforce this. It's simple as that. If we cannot afford each to have one of those water ski, maybe I pool one with my neighbor, and that's how it starts. But something you're touching on, which sits very close to my heart, is this fallacy of not being prepared to spend a little bit more for things that actually last. And I'm quite obsessed with shoes in that sense, because it's a well-being thing. There's nothing worse for your body than to have shoes that are not really fitting, particularly in a business setting. It's worth spending money on a proper pair of shoes rather than buying 3 you wear down and then you keep mending them. Because if you find a really good pair of shoes, they literally last you a lifetime. Just keep looking after them. And when they're really worn down, you go to the guy who knows professionally how to mend them. Spend the money. It's a well-being thing on so many levels to do that. And it should extend to clothing as well. It's probably better to buy a high-quality suit than a low-quality suit.
But we do need the electrical manufacturers to really up their game, because they're not. They're going for cheap, not going for quality that lasts. Because that's how can you possibly grow every quarter and year on year if people aren't upgrading on a regular basis, and that's the problem. And you see the sales. I hate those annual sales in the US, and there'll be some person holding a TV. I bought a new TV. I don't need one, but it was so cheap I bought it. That mindset, right? It's like.
It reminds me, as we were talking along and stuff, this when you're talking about sort of the white goods and the garbage and stuff, reminded of a song called Alice's Restaurant, ancient song by Arlo Guthrie. Anyway, it was an anti-war song. It's talk about building movements and stuff, and there's a rhyme along with it that sort of says you can get anything you want at Alice's Restaurant, and the story goes along about having this big pile of rubbish and we'll dump it, and how it got in trouble for dumping rubbish and all the rest of it. But it's a basic sort of, and it talks about how you end up building a movement and all the rest in there. I like the song. I think it's very much a Marmite song in that way. Some gonna hate it, and it goes on for a long time. But anyway, but this part where the refrain of you can get anything you want at Alice's Restaurant is the problem. We are told we should be able to get everything we want, and no matter what we do with that. When we were writing The Unsustainable Truth, we were kind of digging a little bit more into the recycling culture and into circular economy and those sort of things and so on. The fact is that if one of your light bulb breaks, you can recycle that, and at some other point you can get another one, put it in there in that way. But if you end up getting another lamp, then you need a new light bulb. So you're always going to end up having to have a new thing along, because it just grows along in that way. We shouldn't be able to get everything we want. That's the hard unfairness of it all. We shouldn't.
And that's what changed, right?
Yeah, and we don't think about that as being the principle by which we should live. We think in terms of how we should be able to get everything we want. We should create a world where everyone can get whatever they want in that way. And we define that to be fairness, but it's a fairness devoid of the whole picture of nature and the generations to come and the legacy of what we have on it.
Yeah.
So it's much harder than simply the rubbish. And the rubbish is dealing with the immediate issue. I've got this white goods. What do I do with it? And when I buy a new one, they should replace it along, and whatever it is. But it's this part of then saying, how do we develop those 1.5 billion people that are going to be middle class? What does their middle class look like? And Richard and I talk with some people in kind of like who are working on sort of computer-aided design in kind of interior design type things in Nairobi. And the thing I'm always struck by talking to them is their designs are replicas of what a New York apartment looks like. And I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, why would you do that? You have no experience of that. Why would you do that? It's because the magazines have it and all the rest.
Yeah. And everyone's got a kitchen, and everyone's got a washing machine, and everyone's all that sort of stuff, which can be communal. A lot of the Asian sort of apartment buildings, they've got so much more communal space, but even the newer builds have got more and more of these things. I was in Phuket a little while ago, and there's so many villas. I mean, it's ridiculous what's going on there. There's going to be such a crash. And one of the beautiful rivers that I used to walk, lakes that I used to drive past to get to the boys to and from school, it's just full of building waste, and it's white waste. It's white goods waste, right? So the builders aren't taking responsibility for it. We've got Jonathan here saying right to repair plus right to return. And even the right to return, we had a TV that it failed after just like 2 days after the warranty. And then we took it to see if we could get it repaired. And the cost of repair was more than a TV. And you're kind of like, come on, it's that sort of stuff. It's so stupid.
And I those are important, and I add this part, which is a critical part to ourselves. We've got to think of our own right to have, and that the part of that is we don't like it when it's imposed on us, so it can't be imposed on us. No. But it is something that needs to emerge, and Richard and I talk a lot about emergence and emergent economics. How can a genuine economics emerge? Because that's the only way that it is. That's why it takes a long time. Nature emerges out of the interactions and engagements of all of the species, whether they are tiny microbes to massive elephants. Yeah, it all interacts together, and that emergence takes a long time to come about. But it doesn't come from a right to have, and therefore a demand that someone must provide. It comes from a recognition that actually,
it's just such a big mindset shift, right? And it's in contradiction with the world that is being marketed to us. So, yeah, absolutely. And when you grasp that hugeness of it, and it doesn't match GDP as a growth, and it doesn't match so many of the models that run the world right now.
Absolutely, and that's why fast sustainability is an illusion.
Yeah,
because fast sustainability tries to keep all of those things running, all of those cogs and wheels running, just with different wheels.
Yeah.
I would go even further. I would say that fast sustainability is a contradiction in terms.
Mm.
It's even more than an illusion. It's quick fixes will never work.
No, it's a structural, systemic change, right?
And it goes to the heart of the mindset for sure.
All right, let me go into the next one because I'm sure we can continue this. And obviously technology. So I'm raising 2 teenage boys, and we went through a period where they wanted the latest. And I sort of sat them down and I talked to them about the environmental cost of technology. They do well, on the technology front. They have everything that they need as well as things that they want, right? But I really like the latest desire is the new $5,000 headset from Apple, and I'm like, nah, just nah. At an Apple store, and to be asked if I can, still hold on to that, but making things last for as long as possible. One of the great benefits of being out in Asia is that when things stop working, there's a lot of charities that take your technology, repair it, and then give it to communities that don't have the latest technology. We've seen a lot of computers that are older. I was in the tech industry for a long time. I always had the mindset you upgrade every 2 years. Until about, 5-6 years ago, I think. So now my phones are 4 or 5 years old. I only upgrade when I'm really desperate, but then they have a place to go afterwards. Or I think some of the tech companies are pretty good at recycling, but we don't really know what they're doing behind the scenes. We don't really know. So I do know that there's a lot of places around this region where technology waste goes to die, and there's people who are going through it for the precious metals and being exposed to all sorts of toxins. So yeah, but making our tech last longer. So if your phone's still going 4 or 5 years down the track, you should just keep using it. We don't need to be upgrading them all the time. We really don't.
Earbuds, this is the thing. You don't have to upgrade everything all the time. So the way technology works is that new requirements on kind of processing speed and all the rest of it means that some things can't run on older stuff inevitably. Yeah. But you don't have to upgrade everything all the time. So my phone is relatively new. It's Samsung Z Fold 5, so it's a generation behind in that way. But I got it when it was kind of in between, before the 6 came out and stuff. My laptop is 10 years old. And I can balance between the two of them. I don't actually have to have everything upgraded fast. in that way. So
Yeah.
so it's very much about, you know, are you one of those people who are kind of like early adopters of technology, and
And I was.
you tend to go for that very quickly, or are you one of those people? I'm not. You know, I was very late in getting a mobile phone in that way. That spread is really important, and that's where the real value comes, is that you can have some people fast, you can have, but you need a lot of people who are slow as well.
Yeah.
And the marketing, the pensions, I'm going to call them the pensions for now, the retirees, need us all to adopt everything fast, because that's the way in which the profits can be generated. And they live off the profits, because they don't live off, because they're not paid, you know, salaries in that way. So that's how it is. That's where all the money goes. We did this calculation. I did this calculation. I was shocked at the fact that it basically more than eats up all of those in that way.
And we're gonna do a show just talking about this, because I think it's a really important topic. Right, what else have we got? So I know, look, a lot of people get excited about getting their first EV. I'm surrounded by EVs. It's actually quite a sort of eerie coming back to Singapore, and you can't hear the cars. I've been walking down the road with the dog, and all of a sudden there's a car right up my ass behind me. I'm like, oh, didn't even hear it. But I think people certainly do need a car. A lot of people live in cities where the for public transportation, but the goal that we need is to be moving towards bikes, walking, public transport. We need to fight for it wherever we live, but we can't replace the number of fossil fuel cars or combustion engine cars on the road today with EVs. We just can't. I think teachers, doctors, emergency workers, I think there's a lot of people who fulfill roles that definitely need EVs, but for the majority of people, you know, like the car sharing. So we go everywhere. We basically through the local Grab service. The vast majority of the cars are EVs. We don't need one, so we don't have one. We've got bikes and we've got feet. But this is. Have you guys still got cars? Because Richard, you're out in the country, so you probably still do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One big and one small car. None of them are EVs, and it's for practical reasons. The smaller car is quite old. There were no EVs around then, and it's very low consumption, and it's a perfect little runner for short to medium distances. When you're going further, EVs still haven't provided a solution that you actually need to have the range of going where I went yesterday. It would have been impossible in an electric vehicle. And I think one day, you know, we will probably upgrade and we will go down that route. But one thing worth bearing in mind, which kind of bugs me with all the, you know, unbridled electric vehicle enthusiasts out there, is that there is no point from an environmental perspective to shift from a combustion engine to an electric vehicle before you've actually taken the maximum use out of the old combustion engine vehicle. Because most of the environmental impact comes from the construction of the car, not the running of it. So it's much better to actually make the full lifetime use of your existing vehicle before you upgrade and swap and change. And on a planetary level, it's absolutely bonkers to go on to electric vehicles when we don't have the renewable capacity to actually generate that electricity. In some parts of the world, the additional demand from electricity gets met by burning coal to generate that electricity. I mean, talk about shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, it's not ideal.
The part I'd like to add to this is that, again, back to what we were saying before, the reflection starts with, do I need to make this journey? That's the first part. Do I need to make this journey? The second part comes, how can I make this journey? Then comes the part, how do I drive my car? And this is the same whether you have an EV or whether you have a internal combustion engine. You know, energy, kinetic energy, the energy of motion is quadratic to the speed that you have, which means that if you're going at 20 miles an hour versus 30 miles an hour. You square the 20 and you square the 30, and you get 400 and you get 900 when you square those, which means when you go at 30 miles an hour, your energy is more than double what is 20. The energy has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just somehow appear from nothing. And so if you push yourself between 20 and 30 miles an hour, you make a massive difference to the amount of energy you need and you're using, whichever vehicle you're driving. That energy can be used in some other way. The time difference, if you're in a city, between trying to go 20 and 30 miles an hour, it's not that much. You can replan yourself quite readily in that way. And traffic-wise, the holistic traffic actually flows smoother when it goes 20 than 30, because it doesn't have these sudden stops that creates kind of shock waves that propagates a traffic jam along. And that's the sort of realizations people don't have. You can then add on, EV or otherwise, and those are kind of important considerations and things to consider. We did look at it. We're looking about changing our car, and what we end up doing, I'm a physicist at heart, right? So I end up looking at the relative weight of the vehicle versus the amount of fuel you end up using, and the tire wear, because tire wear is a problem.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
And the electric vehicles are just too heavy.
Yeah. So the vast majority of microplastics found in the ocean are from tires, but that's obviously from combustion engines so far, right? So in the future EV, then we're just gonna double, triple the amount of microplastics that are already the tires. So, it's a really it's an interesting debate, the EV versus combustion engine. The bigger message is we need to get out of individual transportation if we don't absolutely need it. That's the key thing.
I'd like to think of it as, I would love to get on an EV bus over internal combustion engine bus.
Yeah. But that's not something you can change, but it is something you can influence through how you vote and,
well, it's something that you can go along, and you can change that, because actually this is the part that, Richard and I talk about. The greatest power in the world is the money we spend. So we can actually change it really, really clearly. We can go to a bus company and say, I'm not getting on your bus because it's internal combustion engine. I'm going to get all my mates to do that too.
Yeah.
Bring on an EV one.
So you're not seeing that change in the UK to EV buses?
What's happening in the developed world is the following. It's all sort of saying, we're not going to move unless the government subsidizes us.
Yeah.
Now, there is money. It doesn't actually need that. But whilst you can use other people's money, that's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Every investment manager in the world knows it's better to use some other people's money than use their own.
Yeah.
So
I think we all need to be a little bit more like Paris, getting everyone on their bikes, right?
Yes.
Pets. I've got a dog and I've got a cat, and we will not get any more because now I'm fully aware. It's a $246 billion industry, and obviously cats, dogs, and other animals, they eat meat, fish. So they're contributing to the crisis. There are, I think it's something like 1.2 billion animals, pets in the world. I've watched the explosion of pets in Asia. David will know that in a lot of parts of Asia, we've got a big golden retriever, and people are terrified of them. And if you have a big Muslim community, there's a whole other issues when it comes to dogs, right? But I've watched just this explosion of pets in this region. And, I remember the first time I went to India, it was just all packs of stray dogs that used to snarl each other at night. And now I go there and I see people, dog walkers with 5 golden retrievers on a lead. It's a really, really significant change. And we can't keep growing this either. So just even think about it, like the pet accessories, the first Halloween after COVID in America, there was so much extraordinary amount of money spent on pet accessories, so we've just got to be mindful. It's not just you doing it, it's a billion other people doing it, and the impact all adds up. So have you guys got pets?
I do. We have 2 cats, and I think the essence about pets has exploded in a way. And you mentioned about Muslims. It's really interesting, because Muslims sort of says there's reasons for functional reasons and reasons for looking after animals and having animals in that way, but you must not own them for frivolous reasons. And you kind of have to say, well, is the owning of the pet something that's frivolous or not? We got a cat during COVID, and I think a lot of people got pets during COVID, and there was kind of like a companionship, and had to have something around. So pets serve many different purposes in that way. A friend of mine was always reminding me about how his, I think it was grandfather, saw pets in that way, saw cats, which was, you never feed a cat. A cat is supposed to feed itself. It's supposed to keep the vermin down, the rodents and stuff around. That's what the cat's for, in that way. But today, we are frightened when a cat actually does what it does, which is to go hunting small animals.
Well, in Australia, they eat a lot of the indigenous sort of animals, so it's creating a problem over there.
And then what you have is the fact that you have something that probably shouldn't be there, right? You introduce an alien species along to be your pet in that way, and so you've created you've disrupted that kind of that balance along that you may want to go back. It's just like it's like planting different sort of plants that you can have in your garden. Some of them look great, but actually maybe they wouldn't be there, and they all go wild. So be careful, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So we do have cats, and
do you feed them?
I do feed them. My wife feeds them. Kind of is very concerned in that way. I think that what's that thing where you kind of make them into humans and anthropomorphize them too much in that way.
Yeah.
Dogs used to eat scraps. Now they have premium food.
Yeah.
I think that's that kind of distinction. And it's all part of, when you look at farming, we mentioned about vegan and so on. The bigger issue is the industrialization of farming. Much more. And so whether you become vegan or you don't become vegan, it actually makes a difference to pay attention to how your food is. And the best way to do that is to ensure that some part of your food you are able to produce yourself. Whether that's a tomato that you can grow or a lettuce in a pot or whatever, it just re-anchors your view.
Yeah. Well, in Asia, in China and in India, pets are replacing children.
Yeah.
So they are incredibly spoiled. Like when you talk about premium food, it's off the charts. It's a very different sort of mindset, because it's a first generation actually having pets. If you go to the night markets in Taiwan or South Korea, and I'm sure it's the same in China. I didn't see it when I was 2006 was the last time I was in China, so it's changed a lot since then. They have these cages with these tiny dogs, because most people live in apartments, right? So it's always tiny dogs rather than the really big dogs. But I'll see dogs that basically there's snow dogs in the tropics, and huskies, mountain dogs, Burmese mountain dogs, and it's like they shouldn't be in a hot tropical environment. That's not right. It must be, it's so uncomfortable for them. They're shedding their fur all the time. It's hard. But we can't all have pets. We can't all have cars. We can't all have 100 new items of clothing a year. We can't all eat beef every night. We just can't. The planet can't sustain it.
We cannot all have all the things that we want. Yeah. And the best thing to figure out is actually to focus on what really matters.
Yeah. Appreciate who's the genius in you, and be that genius.
All right. So what else have we got? So Jets. So it might take all our time to do this. I wasn't sure. I thought we could get this done in an hour. What do you think? Do you want to keep going? I think it's important. I think it's important because it's the reason I wanted to do it is just getting people to think about what it is that they can do that's different, that contributes. But what do you think? Do you want to keep going?
Yeah. I think let's do that, because the whole all the other
Absolutely.
items we thought of as kind of the big issues of the world and all the rest of it, at the heart of it, they're kind of superficial. They focus us. They don't really get us to kind of think and ask the real questions. The questions that allow us to be a better understanding of who we are ourselves. Not we are in general, but who am I? That's wisdom.
Yeah.
That's the thing that says I don't need to make this trip.
Yeah, trip. So this for me is someone from Australia who just, from a young age, I just wanted to get out there and see the world. So I've flown far more than I have a right to have done in my life from an emissions perspective. So I'm always trying to work out how to pay that back. So one of the things you can do in the UK, I don't know if you know this, you can plant a sequoia tree. So they've basically worked out that there's this area in the UK that has a chance of growing these trees, and if you plant one, and it's a few $1,000s to plant it, it can cancel out a lifetime worth of emissions. So that's one thing you can do. But we all need to be getting off the planes. And I was talking, I think I talked in the last show, but a friend of mine said to me, I really get it, but I see, especially living in Asia, he goes, there's the next million people in India are about to jump on their first plane because they're visiting their kids studying in the US or whatever. So what difference does it make? But the reality is the aerospace industry or the aviation industry can't just keep growing the way it's been growing. It can't just keep growing, so, really starting to think about holidaying closer to home. There was a time when the world was open to everyone, and in a lot of ways, the world is closing to a lot of people because of war, because of geopolitics. I was just hearing about another Australian that got caught up and put into a prison in the US for flying in to visit her husband for 3 weeks. But flights, not only do they contribute to emissions, but they also, the over-tourism is just off the charts, and we're hearing a lot more about that in Europe. The Spanish government have basically just rescinded the licenses of, I think it was 60,000. There was one of the articles that I had at the end, 65,000 Airbnb holiday listings. So, countries are starting to get serious about it. It's contributing to the housing shortage. It destroys the heart of cities. Cities like Amsterdam really suffered from it. But the other thing is, people like me who've been to all of these places when there weren't that many tourists, people like me that now we want to get off the beaten track where there's not any tourists yet. But that's, means that we're just destroying more and more of the world. And, I think it just can't keep growing the way it's growing. We used to have a frequent flyer system, where I actually think we should have a frequent flyer system now that the more you fly, the more you have to pay for it. So I think we have to reverse it. But and for me, this was one that I mourned. When I really sat down and went, I need to stop flying whenever is possible. And I really haven't flown that much since before COVID. Just small flights between Phuket and Singapore as we were moving here. But I've really tried to cut it down. But I'm in Asia. I'm Australian. I have to go to Australia sometimes. My husband's English. He has to go to England sometimes. And but we're very conscious every time we jump on a plane, and we just try not to do it unless we need to. Have you both cut back?
I've cut back in many ways, but I mean, the couple of things following from what you're saying. The first thing I would say is, be wary about offsetting along. We lose 10 million hectares of forests a year in the world.
Yeah.
And about 5 million, less than 5 million is regrown. So there's a gap before. So when you grow a new sequoia tree, you're not offsetting. You're just.
I know. Trust me, David. I'm not a believer in offsetting. It's something you can do, and it was more for past emissions rather than future. Right? I've already done this damage. How can I make up for it? So I'm always and this work is making up for it. And
the other part to that is we live in the context of people we are. So I live with my family, my wife, and my kids and so on. A lot of travel is either business or it's holidays, right?
Mm.
So you end up thinking, how do I do that? How do I organize my lifestyle so that I can do something else? I had a conversation with a friend who was talking about how he wants to go to New Zealand, but he says it makes no sense to make a trip unless you can be there for like 2 months.
Mm.
So he's planning it so that he can be there in that way.
Yeah,
And he's
long
thinking
term.
about that just simply because just think about taking all that journey. If it takes you a minute to go down the shops, you don't mind spending, a minute to buy whatever it is coming back of or whatever it is. But if it takes you, 6 hours to go somewhere and cost you whatever much it does, or 12 hours from here to New Zealand in that way, and you're going to
12
be there
hours,
something like that, right? And
like
you're going to be
24
there
hours at
for
least.
24 hours if you can't have the direct flight time in that way. And so you go along and you just got to make it worthwhile in proportion. Yeah. And yeah, I think this goes back to the sense of saying, the journey counts. Just think about it as the journey part of it counts too, rather than what you do there.
Yeah, no. So what that's like, when they talk about travel and tourism, one of the things is stay as long as you can, and while you're there. So if I go to Europe to visit my in-laws, I'll take my boys and we'll travel on train around Europe because you can, but you can't do that here. But I am going to catch the train from Singapore to London. It's going to take 21 days if I go straight. I'm not going to do that straight. I'm going to do it at some point. But there's no infrastructure in place to make that journey easy, and there's a couple of war zones on the way to have to sort of factor in as well, right? Yeah. So make it count when you're there. But like the flights, the hotel industry, it just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing, and we can't just keep growing. Everything's just growing, and at some point we've got to go, come on guys, like this is enough. There's enough hotels in Phuket. We don't need any more hotels in Phuket.
There's a thing to bring out is so ANA, the Japanese airline, back in 2015, 16 or something. I can't remember I mentioned it into my new book Thrive and Imagine or not. Probably did. I think it's part of emergent change and so on, discussion on that. It's an airline, so it's asking, what can we do as an airline? What should we do? And it's asking, that's the wrong thing to ask. What you need to ask is, what is it that the airline provides? What is it that people need genuinely? And they set up this thing of saying, well, how does a doctor, how can you how does a place which doesn't have that sort of expert doctor, whatever it is, be able to have that doctor in that way? If you think as a conventional airline, you think I can fly him there, I can do a special deal about how it is, and typically if it's far enough away or remote, you then have to build an airport close by, or you end up having to build more roads, you end up building hotels and resorts, and once you start doing that, you end up saying, now that I've built this, what else do I build on this? And that's the resort sort of mentality in some sense. So you tackle a problem by creating a much bigger project out of it than it needs to be. So it started raising this thing about avatars and robotics and stuff instead. How can you have the presence of being somewhere remotely, fully as a person? You can smell the air, you can feel the heat and all the rest of it. You can operate in that way. And today you can actually operate remotely, as a doctor carrying out surgeries in that form. You don't need to travel there anymore. We don't, and Anon as an airline went down that route and then created this whole set of competitions to have people really challenge them about how you can have that presence, remote presence, that is genuinely actually, very, very much real experience in that way. That was 2015, 2016, before COVID, before Zoom and all of these things that really popped up before. And it came from addressing how do we develop as a business, as an airline business, but then he saw it's not an airline business. It's a business about helping people having the experience that they need to have. That's different from saying I'm an airline business, so I have to keep planes flying.
Yeah. So the airline gets a lot of pushback, when you bring it up as a sustainability issue, because people still need to fly and they're going to need to fly, right? And they absolutely are. But like I said, maybe every single person on the planet has a quota every year for flying. Every single person, because the vast majority of people never get on a plane, right? And so every time you fly, once you've used your quota, you pay a quota. You contribute to the quotas of the people that don't fly. And obviously the majority of them are in the developing world who are never going to get a plane on their life. So maybe that's a way that we can start sort of building up some revenue that can go out to the developing world where they can actually use it to enhance their lives. But we've got to do something, but we can't keep growing. And one of the areas that's obviously a big one is the cruise ships. So 1 in 4 Australians are expected to take a cruise this year, and lots of my friends love their cruises. They love getting on with their mates and having a fantastic time, and they do. But it really is a form of tourism that's got to go. Everywhere cruise ships show up, they destroy the environment that they turn up in. And, we're seeing obviously a lot of protests. Amsterdam's one of the ones that's turned the cruise ships away. But they burn 250 tons of heavy fuel every year. And the typical passenger on a cruise ship generates 8 times more emissions than a tourist on land. But there was a big cruise ship exhibition in China, I think it was late last year, for cruise ships to Antarctica. So come on, guys, so that's kind of the next slide. Everywhere we go, we destroy nature. Do we really need thousands, millions of people turning up in Antarctica? That just doesn't feel right to me. So I've been on one cruise ship. It was a nightmare. I hated every minute of it. I had the only anxiety attack I've ever had in my life when I got on it. It's just not me. It was too corny. I know people love it, but and my boys were really young, so it was the easiest way I could take them and see the great sights of Europe, but I hated it. But it was when I was on that cruise ship, I think it was in 2018, that I actually started to look into the environmental impact of cruise ships and was quite amazed by what I found. But have you been on cruises?
I have, and we went many times actually, and it was great. And it was, the first one was my dad got all of us, so this is my siblings, our children, our partners, together. As the first one, I think it was his. It was a kind of a wedding anniversary for my parents, and so we went on this Cunard trip, and it was we all dreaded it beforehand. We thought everybody would fight with everyone, and we fought with everyone. But it was just a great opportunity to be traveling together without having to do the traveling in that way. So there's something that's definitely very good about that. And I think this brings out the element that you kind of pointing to, which is that we don't see the cumulative effect of everyone doing it.
Yeah.
And it's only when you go to somewhere like, Venice or some place, and you see the whole place being swarmed by it, that you sort of think, gosh, this is just excessive. And the thinking is always, they are excessive.
Yeah.
I'm doing it myself. What I'm doing is in moderation, but they are the ones who's excessive.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. That's the difficulty. That's the part where what the cruise ships, what they're pointing out is the aspect that actually we don't have a right to go to everywhere in the world. Antarctica, we don't have a right to go there. It doesn't mean that somehow it's being there and there's been explorers and all those things means that it is somehow everybody there to do. And it comes back down to, how do we want to spend our money? How do we want to think about where we go to in that way? Lots of places are beginning to control the number of people in that way. So Venice
in Europe, yeah, but it's certainly not happening out in Asia. It's all about get more people in, get more people in. We need the money. I mean, the Thailand Tourist Bureau has just announced that there's a massive drop off of Chinese tourists, and that's going to have a huge impact on the economy because tourism is so important to Thailand, right? So they're desperately trying to get people in, and there's there's just too many people building not just resorts but villas. The roads can't cope. The infrastructure like sewage can't cope. There's not enough water. It just can't cope, and you've got to destroy nature to provide that. So the very thing that you go there for is destroyed in the making of it. So, and the other thing about cruise ships is, of course, a lot of places around the world rely on the money that comes in. Those ports, even though their environment has been destroyed, they still rely on the money.
I mean, so this goes back to the whole point we were saying before about fast sustainability.
Yeah.
You have to actually look at it holistically along. And the point about going back about the comment about ANA is you have to look at understanding what people are actually after in that way and what you deliver. We tend to replicate the means because we've been taught that's what we do. That's basically all of our education. Japan was different in terms of its technology, kind of whatever it was called, Society 2.0 or 5.0 or whatever it is, as a technology policy to say actually it's about the people and connecting with the people first. And then we start thinking, how can we do that? What does that actually mean? How can we actually give room for each other so that they can be who they are genuinely? And that includes giving room for nature to be genuinely what it is without having to think of that as being an opportunity for us. Yeah. Because it's not going to be. It provides plenty. We just need to rethink our own pace in that way. So human free zones is, this is the essence of kind of that thrive economy that we talk about.
Yeah.
In that way, you reinvent money by minting it from nature that's intact, that's untouched, and you remake investments so that they come from having to have some part of nature contributed by nature as being intact, that is preserved in that way before the investment start. We do it the other way around. We do all the damage and then we say, how can we patch it back up? So we're really good at band-aids.
Yeah, and I'm sure but you've seen, sticking with the cruise ships, I'm sure you've seen those mega cruise ships that are coming out of Miami these days, right? It's just, no, we can't. We just can't. We can't keep doing that.
They're horrible spring break cruise ships. The ones we went to were sort of, my parents like that. There are differences. They carry fewer people. They had more spaces. They have quieter crowds. They have kind of very different sort of vibe in that sense. And its intention was as much to have the quiet of the traveling rather than to have a what you call it, kind of the funfair inside your traveling.
Yeah, but it is one of those things. It's one of those things we've got to look at, like the way it's growing, and it's great. It's an industry that's growing rapidly, but there's the other side, which is of course the impact. So we've lost Richard. He doesn't know what's happening. So if you can hear us, Richard, join us again if you want. If you can get back in, he said everything's dead. But there is going to be an impact on people on the other side of this. But there's like right across the board, everything that we're talking about, there is an impact on people. From an economic perspective, but there's an impact on all of us from an environmental extreme perspective. So, just all the toxins in our bodies, they're moving towards sterility because, all of the, novel entities that are in the environment, so there's always impacts both ways. And we need to be factoring them in, like if we all move away from fast fashion, well, there's a lot of people sitting in China, Cambodia, Laos, who are reliant on incomes from making those clothes. We're not going to be able to keep all of them in business, but if we can get them to, if we can pay them more and get them to make that take longer to produce, is that a solution? But so we've got this. None of this is easy, right?
I think those arguments are very deceptive. They because what it is that it is only because you cannot do what you're used to doing that you discover what you can really do. And that's what climate change is telling us. That's what nature is telling us. You can't keep doing this. It doesn't matter how you want to argue it. You're not going to be able to. So, that's the reality. What's Nestle going to do when the agricultural system collapses? The industrial agricultural system collapses. It's going to go bankrupt. When a company like Nestle goes bankrupt, all sorts of things go bankrupt. And ripples on. And
one way or another, right?
Right. That's the reality of it. So it doesn't matter to say, oh, we got to sustain all those things. Well, you know what? Nature has got a bigger hand, and it's saying, "F you."
And totally with you, David. But it is one of the things that keeps coming up, and everyone's looking for the solutions to those problems for the people that are going to be impacted. And it's like, if 30 years ago we could have solved that problem.
Yes, and we're now too late.
Yeah. So there's going to be pain. It's gonna hurt, and we can't get away from it. And I think that's really important. So the other thing that
do, and I just want to throw in there, what you got to do is to ask, how can we allow people to be genuinely who they are?
Yeah.
Because they're not factory workers.
Yeah.
How do we allow people to be genuinely who they are? How do we give them the room to be able to do that?
Yeah. And that's where things like universal basic income can come in. I have another idea where, so my eldest has started national service. I think one of the things that we could do is do environmental service, where we get all the young people, when they finish school for 2 years, they've got to go out wherever they live in the world and be part of environmental service, where they regenerate nature. They bring the communities together. They learn skills. They learn how to sew. They learn the basic stuff that, we need to survive. I think there's lots of different ways we can do it. So the next one is exposing yourselves to poisons in your home. So this is something I embarked on a number of years ago, where I was really looking. So at the time we had Auntie Vic, our wonderful Auntie Vic, living with us, and together we basically went through and worked out, well, she did most of the work, I've got to be honest, because she's just one of those people, but all these potions and lotions in the house that meant that we were just getting all of the stuff that wasn't good for us out of the home. So all the chemicals, all that sort of stuff, but also the amount of plastics in the home, like you were talking about, David, that plastic water bottle that you got, or even your contact lenses, when they're plastic. So if you refill a plastic water bottle, it constantly sheds microplastics so that you're drinking it. If you put the plastic sort of contact lens things in the bottom of the plants, you're going to have microplastics in your plant. So, so sort of thing. So whatever you can do, just get the stuff out of your home. So I am almost at the point where I can convince my husband to get rid of the frying pans we've got, because they've got forever chemicals on them. So I'm like, I've been saying it for years, but this is another really important thing. Don't sit in total paranoia about this stuff all the time, because literally there's no food or vegetables. There's no meat, there's no fish, there's no items in your kitchen that you can use, or there's no clothes that you can wear without being paranoid about it impacting your body in some way. We're all already impacted. So don't be too paranoid about it. But I'm trying to get rid of the forever chemicals as well. So I recommend understanding what novel entities are, and the best place to go is to look at the 9 planetary boundaries. I talked about them in the very first edition I did of We Need a New Middle Class Dream. But yeah, just try and get rid of vinegar. Is your best friend. Baking soda as well. I buy those in big lots. So there's lots you can do. Have you gotten rid of all that sort of stuff?
I bought the frying pan, and it brought back some things you used to do, and you come along with this. And how do you use a frying pan? So a lot of it comes back down to how you use it and understanding that. So traditional Chinese, you always heat the pan up, right? Heat the wok up until it's really hot. Then you put the oil on it. So you don't put the oil on it before it's really hot. And then you turn the heat down and you put your stuff in there. And because it is really hot, it sears it and it doesn't stick. So it naturally doesn't stick in that way.
So we've got to go back to those traditional methods again, right?
What the non-stick Teflon stuff does is the opposite, because it can't withstand that heat without peeling off in that way. It tells you not to heat it up. So we have a whole generation brought up without actually appreciating how to do that. It's like the old omelette pan, that you keep forever, made of that sort of cast iron heavy omelette pan. Cast iron heavy because it keeps the heat in that way, and you set up again, and then you don't have to actually do too much to it. It can't practically cleanse itself in that way. And so most of the things that we have traditionally evolved over hundreds of years in our kitchen tools and all of those things work because and lighten the workload that we need. And we have had probably about 3, 4, 5 decades of being persuaded actually that something is better instead.
Yeah.
And
well, it makes your life easier, right?
Except it doesn't.
No, exactly. But it's the middle class housewife post World War II. Oh, buy this, it's going to make your life easier. Buy this, it's going to make. And then all of a sudden, everyone's got all these new technologies, which they are.
That's the point.
That make their lives easier. And here we are today. No one's got an easy life. Everyone's running a million miles an hour. And now we've got this new technology, AI, that's going to make our lives easier. I have not seen a single technology revolution that actually makes their lives easier. It just adds more stuff that we can do in our life.
Yes, and so what it does is it accelerates, it shortens the time in between that we have in between doing things, so that we increases the pressure and increases the selling pressure. The whole marketing that we talked about before.
Yeah,
and the basis of it, again back to this right to have, is playing on this idea of a right to have.
Yeah.
We have a right to an easier life. So that makes us sort of think, oh, I should be able to have that, I should be able to have that, I should be able to have that, because that says I have an easier life. As a result, you end up chasing around to have enough money to be able to buy all those things.
Yeah.
And that's how it keeps going.
Yeah. But we are being asked to slow down. Really, we're being asked to slow down. That's what a lot of the message is. So the other thing we can quickly go through this one is making sure your home's energy efficient. And obviously for people who don't have a lot of money, this is hard. So we've really got to push the governments to subsidise this. So, independent energy is going to be absolutely critical. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to die in the coming heat waves when the grids go down. So if you can have an independent energy source, so you can at least run one air conditioning unit when the grid goes down, you might have a chance of surviving. Or Richard's back, I think.
This is really important. I mean,
what
you say is absolutely right, and I can't emphasize. I've just been in Germany. We stayed with a couple of friends. They all have kind of independent solar in that way. In that way, so some countries are doing it, and and this is the thing, right? So what should government subsidize, and what should they not subsidize? And this is really key along in there. Now, I did this quick calculation, basically, that took a look at the UK government spending, commitments on spending on carbon capture. And that money can provide the majority of households in this country with independent solar.
Yeah, that would probably make more of a contribution.
But it doesn't do that, right? Because there's some mate of theirs who goes along and says, do this is a great business, it creates new whatever it is in that way. The consequence of it is that the carbon capture encourages more emissions and accelerates the pace at which people are going to end up dying because they don't have an independent energy, because grids are going to go down.
Yeah,
they will go down.
At some point, I'm gonna do a video, and I meant to do it when I was in Phuket, and I just ran out of time. But I want to show most people who have been to the developing world have seen the electrical infrastructure, where it's just this big bunch of wires, right? But they're always black, right? And so, like in India, what would happen in an extreme heat wave is those electrical cables, they start to sag. And if they sag and the environment that they sag into is dry, then they can also turn into fires. And in the tropics, where fires aren't actually that common, they are now, they don't have the firefighting infrastructure that that most countries, like a country like Australia, is used to fires, right? But even Australia, what they've got won't be ready for the fires that are going to come based on the acceleration that we're seeing. So and a lot of the electricity is still above ground. So independence, like all of my friends in Phuket who are building houses or villas, I'm like, get solar, just get solar, please, just get solar. Be off the grid if you can, you know.
Yes, and this is the thing, what you described there about the wire sagging or the rest of it, right? So Richard and I used to be investment managers managing portfolio. When something unexpected happens, it always hurts you.
Yeah.
So why is that? It's because you have already priced in the best case of what can happen. That's why you are in that. So when something unexpected happens, it's unlikely to be something better than what you've already expecting. So it always end up hurting you. And that's the same as our rollout, as our plan forward. We're already painting the best picture. So the only unexpected thing that you can expect is something terrible.
Yeah.
Because you're already so far in the right hand of distribution where you've won the lottery, everything is going perfectly. And you place yourself in this belief that this is where it is. So anything unexpected happens, like the wire sinking, doesn't just sink, it's going to cause a fire. Doesn't just cause a fire, it's going to burn a whole village down. It doesn't just burn a whole village down, it's going to stop the logistics from being able to transport whatever it is from A to B that you need.
Yeah, thinking through it, right? And by the way, one of the things you can do if you live in a country where you don't have the money, paint your roof white. Make sure there's there's stories in India at the moment. The poorest people, but the poorest people in India, they're going through such an extreme heat event right now, and it's really early and it's really going to be extended. And they'll live in a room that's basically smaller than the room that I'm sitting in, with a family of 4, and everything's there, and they've got one fan, and there is no fresh air. And then they go outside, there's nowhere to get cool, especially if they're in the cities. There's no trees. Then greening the cities is obviously a critical thing, and the wealthy areas of those cities are definitely greened. But paint your roof white. There's a lot of charities doing some amazing work, but it's obviously not happening fast enough. But
green your own space. And I have this thing. I want an engineer to connect and do it together, kind of thing, right? So it's really hot out there. So you go along and you create a heat chimney that draws air by actually being black, and it causes air to go on up. You can, I reckon, you in the heat you can get quite a lot of flow out of it. So on the other side of it, you bring air in and cool it, and you cool it by thermodynamics. You let it expand. You let it come through a narrow tube and expand into a big space. As it expands, it cools.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of traditional technology that can be brought in that's cheap, and when we do see a lot of it, but it's not enough. The other thing about extreme heat is, of course, it's going to cause long-term medical conditions, because if your body's constantly in overheat, even if it doesn't kill you, it could lead to things like needing kidney dialysis. So organ damage is a big risk of it. Women who are pregnant, I'd really encourage societies around the world with extreme heat to really look at the time of year when women probably should try not to be pregnant, because they're losing their babies, they're losing their lives. So it's there's a lot of factors to it. The next one, which I know that you will both appreciate, is start a garden. If you live in a community, start a community garden. It's really important to get some self-sufficiency here. Food security, it's a huge issue that's only going to become a bigger issue. We saw some floods in Brazil that have wiped out soy, which obviously feed cattle, which is how we get our meat. So the web of connections between these extreme events and our food supply are only growing. I know Richard and David, this is a big passion topic for both of you as well. Because Richard, you've been off for a while. Would you want to jump in?
Absolutely, happy to. Something happened with the French connectivity, but it could also have been me. What do I know? Food is really crucial, and I'm very much in the camp. David's very much in the camp where we think global food production will be increasingly constrained by the climate and other factors as well. To be fair, we are at a very rapid rate taking away arable land to build various structures, mostly cities and other things. And it will become a problem. So anything you can do on a private level to increase that food security, and it doesn't need to be much again. It's a lot easier for someone like me with a house. I have a greenhouse, it's pretty big. I have a garden where I can plant a lot of stuff. But even if you don't have access to that, there's still things you can do in an apartment.
Yeah.
And it's going to become increasingly important that you actually have some form of food supply coming that you can control, because we know exactly what the reaction function will be in the world when food becomes scarce at the national level. There will be export constraints, all the frictions that come in that will make it harder and harder for people to actually find what they need in shops, and prices will go up. So it will become economically more valuable for you to actually have some form of food production you can control.
Absolutely, and it's on two things: the prices and also on the food production itself, right? So the China has been buying Australian wheat past month because it is fearing about its own wheat production. Now it may catch up, it may be okay, but in anticipation, is doing that. That wheat was going to be bought by someone else. So whoever that person is now going to have a higher price. So that's it. Sorry, mate. Your pasta is going to cost more, or the rest of your bread's going to cost more from now on. And that's just how it's going to hurt your pocket. It doesn't have to be your farm that is suffering. It doesn't have to be your kind of specific area that's suffering. When it happens somewhere else, everything is so interconnected. They're going to do their best to try and cope. And in that way, it's going to drive up your price. So that's why you having some means of food production means that you'll be less exposed to the cost of your food going up. And that's really important to think about. So then what do you do? Well, the best environment, the environment you're most likely to have some control of, is inside your own house. So start thinking about what can you grow within there and experimenting with it. Because you have the water that you use. So you wash your rice, right, before you cook it. Don't pour that water away. Use it to water the plant you're growing. That way, you're actually making use of the resources, cutting down on your water costs, making sure that even when it gets really dry outside, if you've got water enough to cook your rice, you can actually use the water you wash it to do that.
Yeah.
Going back to what Andrea talking about, vinegar and all that stuff. If you use those sort of stuff to do your cleaning and things, then you know that the water you have used from there is okay to use again, because it's not full of the chemicals that you fear when you pour the stuff on. And you can start treating that in some other way and actually use it again, and plants and vegetables will be managed with it. So a lot of those things all come along, and we have lost that art of being able to have green fingers.
Yeah. We absolutely did. My parents, I remember my dad had them. So we've got Oliver who's joining us live for once. Hey, Ollie, he always listens every week and comments, but he's talking about the allotments in the UK, which of course are famous from the wars, right? So my parents-in-law have an allotment. It's hard to get them, but that's as a concept. So here there's these sort of apartment complexes, and they call them HDBs. So you own the apartment. And they've got these huge lands at the bottom, right? And sometimes I'll see on the roof they've got a garden on the rooftop, or solar panels on the rooftop, or in the garden. But setting up community composting. A friend of mine in Sydney, do you remember Johnny, who joined us when we were talking? Yeah. So his wife Ellie they naturally set up a composting community where they had a big bin, and then the council came in, gave everyone a fancy bin. And then started managing the process. And what they did was destroy the community that had been naturally built around building the compost community. So, like whatever we can do, wherever we can do it, and doing it now and learning and failing, like you were talking about leaves before. So we have mint in our tea every day. So I'm always harvesting our mint, but I'm trying to work out the best place for it to grow. So I've got this new pot going with all the leaves in the soil to create some compost in the environment, so that it looks like it's working. But learning again how to grow,
Absolutely. I came back, I was saying, I was in Germany and we were walking around, and there was this house that was throwing things out, and there's a door that he threw out, bit of a kind of door screen, and so I picked it up, because we were moving furniture back, so I had a van and we brought it back, and I have a bit in my house which is a little bay window that it's a bay window. It's very nice, but you don't often use it because it sort of sinks back in and sticks out a bit. So it's basically about 3 feet by 5 feet kind of size, or maybe 6. And the door just fits in there, or whatever the door size thing's in there. I stand on top of 2 kind of low shelves in that way. So now I got a planting space right up there at the level of the windows where the light can get in. I now need to go and get some grow bags or something to put on there and start thinking, what do I plant?
And it's good for your back too.
Yeah. And I don't have to bend down low or anything. It's inside, and it is basically a mini allotment.
Yeah.
And I live in the centre of London where I can't get those things otherwise.
Exactly. So look, there's joy in it. So I planted some blue pea, a blue pea. What is it called? It's a purple flower plant from Thailand, and I've just gone blank on it. Anyway, I just started producing some peas the other day, so I was just walking along eating the peas, and there's something so amazing about growing something that you can then eat, right? So yeah, do it. So I just want to keep us moving, but who are you banking with? Are they invested in the future? And moving banks is an incredibly difficult thing to do, right? You will both know much better than I. This is your future. Are you banking? Is your money sitting with someone who's investing in your future or who is taking away from your future? I think that's an important one.
Absolutely. So, it's super important, and it goes back to the choices you make. If you want the responsibility and the right to make those choices, you need to take the other side of it all. So make sure you are happy with the choices you made, just like you're happy with the choices you made with the food you buy, the clothes you wear. Yeah. Banking is just like any other product in that sense. And you should probably also then educate you about what that bank stands for. And it's not the easiest things to do, but it's probably worth the effort if it matters to you. And that's ultimately what it boils down to.
Yeah. All right. So I know David's got to go soon. So, so we've talked about this before, but don't hoard wealth, use it. So there's a lot of people holding on to their wealth, saving for a future that doesn't necessarily exist. But if we could use our wealth now to contribute to, our children's future through sustainability efforts in whatever way or shape or form that makes sense to you, because all wealth will diminish as climate extremes accelerate. So I think this is a really important one.
Yeah. And I would qualify it by saying, you're facing uncertainty, so you don't know what happens. So the sort of thriftiness is a sensible thing. But at the same time, when you're sure about who you are and what you need to do, spend your wealth and do it. Don't wait. So rather than just saying, just spend your wealth, because if you do that, you're going to buy another 6 generations full of fast fashion clothes.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, don't, no.
Exactly. So you need to be thrifty about your money. But when you recognize something that's that is genuinely who you are, then you need to do it. Because if you don't, then you won't be able to face the challenges ahead. You need to be able to step forward, and you need to be able to give you the best chance of doing that, and your wealth will let you do that. But don't spend it just on the 6 generations of.
I'll give you an example, right? Rather than buying a holiday home, which means a family's not going to be able to afford a home, go and buy an acre of land and let it regenerate. Do something like that. Contribute.
I absolutely. I think very much of the accumulated capital as energy in some form. And energy is scarce, so it's valuable. Think about how you invest it. Think about what it actually is you're spending about. Don't do it frivolously. make use of this energy and this gift you got in terms of the capital. So make sure you use it wisely.
Yeah.
And I want to finish off because I unfortunately need to go. So, and I want to say that think of the return of your spending, not in terms of the traditional investment returns, but in terms of how that helps you to be a better you.
Yeah, and the final thing I think in this list, let me just quickly go forward. Yeah, because there were some questions next. So we didn't have, we got more than halfway through. So well done.
Yeah.
but these are the actions, right? And there's other things like questions you can ask yourself, and I've got it in a blog. I've got it on LinkedIn. You can find it. But the most important thing is when you start doing things, start talking about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Inspire other people to follow you, normalize the conversation. Like, this is a really, really important part. This is not a negative thing. This is a beautiful thing. I've been on this journey for a long time. I found it a really positive experience. I've done it with my family. My boys are totally bought into it, and they have been since they were quite young. So, normalize the conversation, talk about what you're doing, inspire others. We need 1 billion people changing imperfectly. So we need to recruit that billion together to get into action. All of us need to be doing all of these things as best we can, and then inspiring the next 3-4 million people to get involved, as well as bringing the final 3 billion out of poverty. So that's our goal. It's not a small goal. It's a massive goal. But
it is. It's a
we can do
worthy
it.
goal.
Yeah,
well, that's a great place to finish.
Yeah, and David, just before you go, you guys are about to run a course, and Oliver, I don't know if you want young people. Oliver's not probably young enough for your group, but what are you doing? What's this Thrive workshop? Talk about it.
So over London Climate Action Week, which is from the 21st to the 26th or something, no, 23rd to the 26th of June. We're going to take 3 evenings, the 24th, 25th, and 26th, and we're going to have people in for a Thriving at Nature's Pace. It's going to be a very small group, 6 people, 3 evenings. That's 6 people over 3. That's 6 people for 2 hours on each of the evenings.
Okay.
So 7 to 9. There will be a small fee to it. You get soup and bread, soup and salad, basically soup, salad, and bread. Vegan. So we cope with any diet things by avoiding all the diet things.
Yeah.
Possibly even grown in a garden near you.
Yes. And it's going to go through the program we're launching as the Thrive Academy, which is about how young people and young professionals can be pioneers of what we call a Thrive economy. That's an economy that thrives at nature's pace. And it's radical. It's not for everybody. It's small deliberately because it's you who count. It's not the numbers. It's intimate so that you can be you. And it's also very challenging because it's like things I've been saying today in many ways. We start by asking, how do I get the wisdom to know who I am? Mm-hmm. How do I allow that to motivate me, give me the faith to understand that it's not about the right to have, it's about the right to be who I am, the ability to be who I am. It's not even a right. And from there, how does that turn the whole big economy into something that actually goes at nature's pace?
Yeah. Sounds awesome. All right, we're gonna say goodbye. So when we turn up into
and to find out more about it, just follow our posts. We're going to post every day a little bit.
Yeah, you can find Richard and David both on LinkedIn, and you can find them through me if that's the connection you need. Thanks for listening. I thought we would get all the way through. It doesn't matter that we didn't, but every single one of us can start somewhere and can do something. It's a joy to do it. I've been doing it for a long time. I've involved my family. This is what we need to do. We really need to bring it all down. We need to stop growing the destructive industries. And we can do this. We can do it. It's not going to be without pain. But let's recruit 1 billion people. Come and join us. We're committed. We're all going about it in different ways, but we're all committed to the future of not just for our children, but for all life on this planet. So let's get to work. We can do it. All right. See you in a few weeks.
See you.